Hi, my name is Ledbetter. I'm sorry I can't be with you today. Scheduling is a bear. As it turns out, there are no flights that will get me to Denver and back here to Abilene, where I live in Texas, at a time that works at all. I have hearings that I'm on a panel of three people who preside over hearings on matters that are important to people here in Abilene, and I need to honor them. And I really wish I could be with you. Can't. But maybe allow me to offer this video tribute to my friend Jerry. First, a little bit about myself. As you know, I'm now living in Texas. Used to live in Centennial, Colorado. I have some military service, as you might have guessed. I was in the Air Force during Vietnam. People ask me, well, what did you do in the Air Force? And I say, well, I went to school. I did get a paper cut, though. But they riffed me after Vietnam was over, so I did not do a whole lot then at that point. But I was in the Army later on. I figured I hadn't done my part, and so I figured I'd get back in it. So I rejoined, this time in the Army. I'm going to do what the Army does. I served in the infantry and with special ops guys, those Green Berets you might have heard about. I was deployed a number of different places in the world. My last assignment was pretty special. I wound up being the Chief of Ground Operations for Special Operations Command, Joint Forces Command, as part of JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command. So I say all that to tell you how maybe Jerry and I could talk shop with each other. Let me tell you about him now. He's the fellow that we really need to talk about today. Jerry was one of the most generous people I've ever known. He was always giving. If I have to put one word on his tombstone, it would be giver. He gave so much. You've read his obituary, I'm sure, by now, and the truth is, there's a lot more to it than that. There was even some stuff in there that I didn't know, but let me tell you what I do know. Not only a giver, he gave stuff to everybody. He was a world-class scrounger. That boy could come up with stuff. Man, I would have loved to have him in my unit, just for that alone. And if there's anything about Jerry that's true, he was committed to the right thing being done regardless. Sometimes his methods about getting it done were a little colored outside the lines, shall we say. But Jerry was results oriented. Well, that comes from being in the outfit that he was in, and I get it. I truly understand. Sometimes I also wanted to color outside the lines just a little bit. You already read some of his military exploits, but I want to give you, if you don't mind, a couple more war stories that I happen to know. In Vietnam, Jerry was assigned to a headquarters in a small fire base. And he happened to be in the radio shack when a call came in. There was an A-team of Special Forces, one of the small operational units, was pinned down and desperately needing help. They needed that somebody come help us and get us out of here. We're pinned down by a superior force and we're all going to die if something doesn't happen quick. Well, they sent a Huey after them, which was a good thing to do. But the Huey driver didn't know. that there was going to be an extra passenger this time, because Jerry grabbed a M16 and he jumped on that bird. He didn't tell anybody. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't get any orders. He just got on the aircraft because people needed help. That's Jerry. When he got to the location of the firefight, the helicopter landed, but it had to get back out of there because it was just too dangerous. Helicopter was going to be shot up so bad that it wouldn't be able to take anybody either. So helicopter left, but Jerry stayed. Jerry went around it with the men that were pinned down, and he soon discovered what the biggest problem was a machine gun nest. There were some machine gunners up on a hill just above them there, and they were just wearing our boys out. Well, Jerry left the group. He melted off back into the jungle on the side and went around to the side and went around and actually flanked that machine gun nest without them even knowing. He got right up on them before they saw him. He took them out. That alone saved a lot of people. But that alone changed his life, because Jerry took 6 rounds of ammunition into his intestines, into his guts. He was shot up pretty bad. He was not terribly disabled, but his abdominal wall was pretty badly compromised. He got back to the men, and they saw how badly tore up he was from gunshots. They laid him down and tucked his BDU, his fatigues, tucked his shirt in tightly, pulled his pants up, tightened his belt, because if they hadn't done that, his insides were beginning to fall out. So that's the way that part ended. But it's going to get better from there. They finally overpowered the rest of the VC and at least got some helicopters in. And Jerry started helping people load the wounded onto the helicopters, and he loaded everybody. And then, as he told it to me, he saw there was no room on that final chopper. So he stepped back, he gave him a wave, and he ran back off into the jungle with the enemy. I asked him, Jerry, man, why didn't you just stand on the skid or anything? He said, well, there wasn't any room, and I figured I was dead already. Well, Jerry wasn't dead already, as we all know. Let me tell you what happened next. They saw him run off. The enemy did. They were going to catch him. They were going to get their vengeance on this boy. So he ran through the jungle with his arms holding his insides in, carrying a rifle in one hand and his insides in the other. And he outran these guys. He finally figured that maybe his best shot was to climb trees. So he found a tree and he climbed up in it. I remember him telling me that he said, well, I know that soldiers don't look up all that often, and I'm hoping these guys are soldiers, less like I was. And sure enough, they went right past him. He was nervous about that because if one of them stopped underneath that tree, his wound was, well, leaking a bit. And he was afraid that some of the material coming out of him that he couldn't control was going to drip and fall on one of those soldiers. They would look up and that was the end of it. They didn't find him that day, but they kept looking. As soon as Jerry saw a chance, he got back down and kept running. He ran through the jungle, those guys chasing him every day for about another 4 days. Then they finally gave up on him. But he was still alive. I don't know how, frankly. Nothing to eat, nothing to drink, insides hanging out in your hand. He said that he would, sometimes every evening, he would sit there and take his knife and kind of cut the wound back open again and squeeze some stuff out to get rid of the pus. Sorry, I know that's a little bit gross, but that was the truth of the matter. That's our Jerry. And then he figured, since he was already dead, he said, you know, these North Vietnamese are going to find another group of Americans. They're going to do the same thing to them they just did to my buds. I'll take care of them when that happens. So he followed these North Vietnamese through the jungle. Sure enough, they found another patrol of Americans and pinned them down. They had what's called plunging fire, because the enemy here that Jerry was following was up on a ridge line overlooking a lower area where the Americans were, and boy, there's not much place to hide from fire that's coming from high. So they were getting tore up pretty bad. Jerry said that his tactic was not that difficult. He said, start on one end of the line. They kind of all formed a line on top of that ridge, you know, a little ways apart from each other, and they just kept shooting down towards the Americans. Well, Jerry started on one end, killed that soldier, went to the next position, snuck up on him, killed that soldier, went to the next position, and killed the next soldier. Now, that may sound difficult, but you got to understand, he's in enemy territory where the enemy is shooting towards Americans. And when the Americans saw movement up there, they thought it might be the enemy, and they shot at Jerry too. Now, fortunately, they didn't hit him. But then, the next thing that happens is that Jerry ran out of ammunition on his M16. And he used that weapon like a club, grabbed it by the barrel, which is, I suspect, pretty hot by now, and he beat that man to death in his position with his M16 until the rifle actually came apart in his hands. He then grabbed the other man's AK, kept on. He went to the next, and the next, and the next. And finally, Jerry got them all. Every last one. And the Americans still weren't sure the war was over, because they kept shooting towards Jerry. Well, now the trick for Jerry came to, how do I get back to my people? They think I'm the enemy. So he started yelling at them and trying to talk to them and saying, hey, I'm one of you guys, let me come in. Well, they didn't know he was there, and the enemy's pretty deceptive, so they weren't sure at all. He finally convinced them, I'll come in with my arms up. I'm pretty badly wounded myself. I could sure stand to have some help from you. Finally, he convinced them. He walked down that hill, and they met him. After they finally were sure it was him and not some imposter, they called for medevac. A couple more Hueys came in. And Jerry, being Jerry, helped load the wounded onto those helicopters. And again, Jerry, being who he is, didn't get on until the last. He made sure there was room before he got onto that helicopter. They hauled him out, took him to the hospital, where they patched up his gut best they could. And he lived. A lot of you don't know that story. Truth is, the first engagement, when he took out the machine gun nest and came back and then still put people on the helicopter and then waved off the choppers as they flew away, that was worth a Congressional Medal of Honor all by itself. Certainly they've been awarded for less. But the second act of incredible heroism was when he took out that whole group of enemy soldiers and came back in and finally loaded those other boys up on the helicopters. That's another one, absolutely worth the Congressional Medal of Honor, no question in my mind at all. In fact, I'm told they put him in for it, and there was an E4 in the headquarters there someplace that saw the whole thing and said, well, saw the report that came in, and said, I think this guy's got one already. I'm not going to give him two. we're going to downgrade it. So I gave him a silver star instead. Oh my, really? My dream was always to get him one, at least, Congressional Medals of Honor. He would not have accepted it from Obama, certainly not Biden. And I thought, now that Trump's back in, I see if I can't turn the handle, get that done for him. Well, that's not going to happen, it seems. Regardless, that's one story. Let me tell you another one. And this is kind of where he and I had a connection that we didn't even know about for a while. After Vietnam was over, I was recruited by a guy by the name of Lee Reagan, Special Forces type, who I knew very well, to join a team that was being led by a fellow by the name of Fred Zabatoski. You can look up Fred. Quite the fellow. Medal of Honor, actually, awardee. They made movies about that boy. At any rate, Fred was going to select me for the team. The whole mission was to go back into, well, not even North Vietnam. We're going back into Cambodia, maybe even as way up to edge of Burma, because we knew where the North Vietnamese had taken our prisoners during Vietnam, and we wanted them back. And I was part of the mission to go get them. I found that later on the mission was scrubbed, and I remember Fred telling me, Jay, the mission's scrubbed, we're not going to go. And I said, Fred, we got Americans there. Let's load up. Let's go anyway. It's fine. We're off book anyway. Nobody knows about us. Not even the Pentagon. Let's go. He said, no, Jay, we're not going. That's the end of it. He didn't tell me why. And that sat in my gut. That mess sat in my gut all the way up till about 3 years ago, when I told Jerry that much of the story I just told you. And Jerry looked across the table at me and he said, Jay, would you like to hear the rest of the story? What? You know something about this? He says, oh yeah. And I got to tell you, I will admit it, I'm a little skeptical, because this thing was so closely held. To say it was off book and black is to minimize what it really was. Jerry said that after Vietnam he went to work for J. Edgar Hoover, and you already know that part. One day Hoover said, they're planning a mission over there at the Pentagon. Why don't you go and see if you can give them some help? Maybe you can help them out a little bit, because J. Edgar knew Jerry's skill set and background. So he went over to the Pentagon and he says, I'm here to talk about that mission. And they showed him into a room. There were two rooms right next to each other. One was a briefing room, and then one was just a sort of an ante-room, a conference room attached to the side of that room. They were not really all that connected. But here's what happened. They said, Jerry, you don't have clearance enough to be in the room with these other guys, but I tell you what, you sit in this room, you can listen through the door. We'll leave that cracked a little bit. You can listen through the door, and if you can offer something, tell us. Well, Jerry told me who was in that room. It was Fred Zabatoski was in that room, and he was being questioned. I think there was one other really, really high Department of Defense official, and I think the Deputy Secretary was in the room. So, I mean, there was brass on top of brass in that room. And they were asking Fred, why did you choose this Ledbetter guy for your team? See, I'd always wanted to know that. I didn't think I was at the same level as these other guys. I thought it was certainly a high honor, but man, I mean, I just said, Me? Really? Okay. I mean, I was proud to do it, but I just didn't understand why I got chosen. Well, I'll shorten the story a little bit. Fred told the story of why I got chosen. I'll shorten it to say, apparently I had a reputation for being able to take a steaming mess and turn it into something workable. I would not be stopped. Well, that's true. That kept me going through most of my military career. And Jerry, I think, knew that I was a bit skeptical whether he really knew this thing. But again, it was hard. And then he told me, you know, everybody on the team's got a team code name. And he told me what that code name was. And I sat there with my mouth hanging open. My wife didn't even know that code name. Nobody knows it. Zabatoski knew it. Lee Reagan knew it. I knew it. And for operational security, nobody else. But Jerry knew it. Because Zabatoski says, yeah, we call him, and they gave that code name. Because of this characteristic that he has. And I was fairly adept at weapons, just so you know. Anyway, back to the point. Later on, I found out why, and Jerry told me why they canceled the mission. Just got snatched right out from under us. Jerry was there for another meeting. And I think it was a deputy secretary said, Fred, we're scrubbing the mission. And Fred said, wait a minute. You can't scrub this mission. There are Americans still alive over there. Let's go get them. We can't do it. And the deputy sec says, no, it's got to be scrubbed, and here's why. Apparently, there was a political fellow, pretty famous political fellow, didn't actually want he didn't want to be embarrassed or have his colleagues embarrassed by the fact that there were Americans alive. Because they had been telling Americans on TV and all other things, nope, there are no Americans alive in Vietnam. Well, that was true. They weren't in Vietnam. But they were alive. That individual apparently was so invested in making sure that he kept his integrity. And he's a political type, I'll just tell you that much. I'll tell you even more about him in a minute. He went to Paris and told the North Vietnamese what was going on. Told them about the mission. Found out enough about it to know that there was one. And the North Vietnamese moved our men away from the place we knew they were. This politician killed, by his actions, a lot of American servicemen. Prisoners, just hoping against hope to one day be free. And we were going. We were ready. I mean, we had a ship out date. We were seriously ready. I won't tell you this politician's name. It's just not worth it. But I will tell you that he served in a prominent position in the Obama administration. Just let that be enough. Bottom line, a bunch of Americans died. And Fred and I and Lee and the rest of the team were not permitted to go after him because of a politician. Did that change that new information that Jerry gave me? Did that change my outlook? No, but it gave it some faces and names. And now I knew why. You see, Fred saved my life. When he looked me in the eye and said, "Jay, the mission is scrubbed. We are not going, and that's that. Get over it." Now, was I mad at Fred? No, I trusted Fred. But now I know who to blame. One day, that politician's going to stand before the throne of God and answer for that. I don't want to be where he's standing. So it was that Jerry Bueker gave me that bit of information that I had been, for 20 years maybe, missing, whatever it was. At the time Jerry gave me that information, he was living with me. Jerry and I became friends a long time ago. He and I and Roy Benavides hung out together. I loved Roy too. By the way, did I tell you that Jerry earned actually 2 medals of honor and never got one? Roy knew that story too. And although Roy could not give Jerry the little device, the medal itself that hangs around the neck of a CMH awardee, he gave Jerry the neck ribbon that he had worn. That blue ribbon with white stars all up and down it. He gave Jerry that, and he said to Jerry, "You deserve this more than I." Coming from Roy Benavides, that's quite the statement. So how did Jerry get to be part of my family? Well, again, I had known him for years. He had not told me any of these stories. Although later on he said, "Jay, I knew your name long before I met you." I guess that he remembered it from that little time in the Pentagon. Anyway, back to the story. I had hired Jerry to do some private investigating stuff. He was very good. That boy could work undercover. And I got a call from him one afternoon. "Jay, I've fallen on hard times. I can't stay where I was staying. Today I'm homeless. Would you pray for me?" he says. I said, "Jerry, my goodness, of course I would pray for you." "No, that's not enough. Yes, I'll pray. Jerry, you know where I live. Get your stuff together. Get on over to my house. We got a room upstairs. It's for you." The way I figure it, Jerry had bought and paid for a room in my house many times over. I wasn't going to let that boy get on the streets. Not 1 minute, not 1 day. Nope. So Jerry came to live with us, hung out with us for about 3 years, I think it was. Well, whatever it was too short. We had a special event in our lives that made it possible for my wife and I to move back to Texas, our old home place. And Jerry had another place to go, so that was okay. And then I heard how it all happened, that he went to the hospital and didn't make it there. Seemed like his those internal injuries that had been plaguing him his whole life following that incident with the machine gun nest, seemed like maybe that finally caught up with him. Jerry was always having trouble. with his insides. Yeah. But that didn't matter. Not to him. And for the same reason he wouldn't get on that first helicopter, and for the same reason he wouldn't get on the second series of helicopters until everybody else was on, Jerry did not want to have medical attention. Well, that's Jerry. To say he's a tough old boot is maybe an understatement. So, can't tell you how many times I hauled him off to the hospital myself. Because, well, he wasn't going to get medical attention, and I wasn't going to let him not. So there we go. I was the stronger of the two. So we went. But Jerry was a fighter, right to the very end. I wish I could have been there with him. Wish I could have been there for him. I wish I could have been holding his hand when he stepped into the great beyond. The good news is Jerry and I talked a lot about God. And it wasn't talk just about somebody you don't know. It's talk about somebody you do. We talked about faith. We talked about love. We talked about sacrifice. And we talked about God. I am so convinced in my heart that Jerry was a solid believer in the Savior. I'm absolutely convinced of that. I could not be more certain of that. Of course, the judgment is for somebody else, not me. But let me just say this much. I would offer testimony in that court. And the truth is, I don't know if they allow people to wear their fancy green berets in heaven. If so, I imagine there's several hundred of our comrades up there giving Jerry a nice parade and saluting him today. Some people say, well, maybe Jerry's looking down on us. Gosh, I hope not. I don't want him to think about this crazy world and how stupid it is right now. I want him to bask in the glow of God. That's what I want him to do. And not worry for a minute about what's going on in this particular battlefield. The rest of us are left here. It's our battle now. When I hung up my fancy uniform, I did it because I joined another army, God's army. I like God's army better. Messes up fewer things, let's just be honest. God's a great commanding general. Let me urge you, if you haven't gotten to know my God, Jerry's God, grab a Bible, read it. It's all true. And maybe one day when we all pass into that great beyond, we'll give each other a hug. And I'll get a chance to say one more time to my brother, Jerry, I love you. Carry on.